All the way from Bukwata village in Limpopo, South Africa, we bring you Missionary Minds, where you can learn about family, church history, biblical worldview issues, and of course, missions, all from the mind of a real-world missionary of almost 20 years. Buddy Paul, I remember growing up, and with my mother's forks and knives, I used to make use of makeshift tools and try and open screws and everything. So in the drawer, everything would often be bent. And so I had an early start. That's how I got into having the right tools to use for a hardware job. But I can imagine for anyone to do a good job at something, when they're starting out, it helps if they have the right tools. And we want to find out a bit about having the right tools today with regard to family worship. So what are some handy resources we can use when trying to have effective family worship?
All right, brother. Thank you. You know, we like to talk a lot about family worship here at Missionary Minds, and I thought I would just go through some books that help, not only on the philosophy of family worship, but actually running family worship itself. And again, I think family worship is very unusual in Christian homes today, sadly, where it was a staple in years of the past. And so I think that there could be some sources that could really put parents on the right path. And I thought I'd start with probably the best resource that I have. I have a stack of books with me right now. And what many of these books have in common is one word, and that is Beeke. Joel Beeke has been such a forerunner, not only for getting Puritan resources around the world, but he really emphasizes family worship. And so a number of the books that I have here are by Joel Beeke. He writes a lot of articles on it. It's just such a breath of fresh air. I was in his home once in Michigan. It was a great blessing that my wife and I sat down with he and his wife, Mary. And he's just a humble, kind, pious man in the best use of that word. And some of his resources have really been a blessing to our home. So let me start with a little blue book I have here called Family Worship Bible Guide. And it's by his publisher, Reformation Heritage Books. And this is basically a little commentary on practical thoughts of all 1,189 chapters of the Bible. So the whole Bible, actually what they did is they took the Reformation Heritage Study Bible, and then they took out the section of thoughts for family worship in each chapter, and then they just put it in its own volume. So I don't know of another study Bible that actually focuses on thoughts for family worship, but that is unique. And so they decided to put it in its own volume. So this is, I don't know, about 1,000 pages, but it's small. And I think it'll be a great resource for mother and father sitting down, having family worship. You read a chapter. So I'm just going to do an example here. I'm going to read from chapter 24, because this is what we read today as a family. And I can imagine that maybe the mother's doing this, or the father, he's leading it, but he says, I'm concerned. We sit down as a family, we read something, and we don't know exactly where to go with it. I need help. Well, reading a study Bible might not help either, because that's going to be explaining the Greek word, or it's going to give the historical background. That's going to help you understand the passage, but I don't know that's necessarily going to help you give practical thoughts for family worship. This book will do that. It just gives about 2 paragraphs of practical insight for each chapter. So I'm looking down at the page right now. It says chapter 24. Number 1, it gives about 10 lines of practical thoughts, and then a second paragraph. And let me just read this. This is the story of the Apostle Paul before Felix. And it says, one reason Paul could speak so boldly and freely before all men when Felix trembled before God was that Paul's mindset was to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. That's in verse 16. Now, how does that help us? He goes on to say, obviously Paul was a sinner, but he sought daily cleansing from his sin and grace to live righteously and holy by grace. Why does living with a clear conscience give courage? How can we do this? So it actually ends with a question. And I think one of the benefits of family worship, yes, you're going to teach, but I really think that maybe an even greater benefit of family worship is the discussion aspect of it. You're not preaching a sermon. You want the family together. You want them asking questions. You want to learn how to ask questions. You want to ask them questions. You want them participating. As you know, our little liturgy of spread, could you maybe review that for us quickly, Brother Carney? Spread, what does that stand for?
Spread is for family worship: sing, pray, read, explain, apply, discuss.
I mean, I put you on the spot. I mean, there was no notes. He was looking at
it only came to me right at the last second. I was like, spread.
Yes, excellent. And that last one, D, really is important. And even the directory on family worship that the Puritans put together hundreds of years ago, they talk about discussion. Beakey talks a lot about discussion. So don't feel as though, all right, we're going to have 15 minutes of family worship in the morning and have a 30 minutes in the evening, and I'm really stressed out about this because I don't know a sermon to preach. Here's what you do. Start by singing, pray, read the Word of God, explain it, try to apply it, and then have a lot of discussion. And what this book does is it spurs discussion by ending a lot of the paragraphs with questions. Like I just read, why does living with a clear conscience give courage? Just throw it out there. How can we do this? And now you get a discussion as a family. So this is probably the first book that I recommend to people in urging them to have family worship. Oftentimes we try to have family worship when we visit other people's homes, not to be flaunting it before them, but just to be a good example. We've mentioned this before. If you're at another person's home and you have a nice meal, everyone eats pizza, you're talking about the ball game. Now it's getting a little bit later. It's 8:30 at night. It's time to go home. And maybe privately you go to your buddy and say, hey, would you mind if we, sat down in the living room and had a little brief time of family worship? And depending how close your friendship is, he's going to say either, yeah, it's great, or, oh, okay. But if he's a little nervous about that, this is probably unusual for him. Say, hey, I'd be happy to lead it. I don't have to lead it, but I'm happy. Usually he'd be happy for you to lead family worship. And then you exemplify it for him, and he sees it and he says, wow, that's really neat. How do you do that? Could I have a resource to help me? This would be a good place to start. It's called Family Worship Bible Guide. And it's edited by the professors at the Puritan Reformed Seminary in Michigan. And again, these are the notes. You could also get the Reformation Heritage Study Bible, which would also have in it. But this is a great little resource. And Brody Carn, as you can see, is small. It's not threatening, right? It's a little book, and it'll be a good. And by the way, this is actually helpful to me in preaching. Sometimes I'm preaching a passage and I just want some puritanic, earthy application that just gets to the heart. This is not going to do any word studies, but it's going to pull out a lot of good applications. Great resource to have.
That's very good. I was first introduced to it when listening to a podcast of him being interviewed. It might have been by Costi Hinn, and then he mentioned the importance of family worship and also this guide. And I told my wife about it, and a friend got it for us for Christmas, as I mentioned last time. So very exciting resource. What's the next one?
Okay, let's talk about Family Worship by Donald Whitney. We went from a small book to a really small book. In fact, most books on family worship are either booklets, pamphlets, papers, articles that you can read. They're not very thick. This is called Family Worship. Donald Whitney is a professor at Southern Seminary. And with actual print, it's probably 50 pages. It's very small, only a few chapters. I would say its greatest benefit is probably the chapter on church history. And he gives examples, even modern people like D.A. Carson, Charles Spurgeon in the day, going all the way back to Tertullian. We talked about Tertullian today and giving quotes from Tertullian. So a lot of men through church history just talking about the importance of having family worship consistently. But I did want to read a little anecdote that I thought was helpful. This is on page 63. He tells a story about a man named Rick Husband, who was an astronaut. Now, right now, as I'm doing this podcast, I'm just picturing all of my little children around me. And I know how this works. I'll talk about scripture, and hopefully I can explain it in such a way that they're interested and excited. But as soon as I start talking about a story, their eyes get big.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just picturing them right now as soon as I mention an astronaut. So that's what you want to do. You want to have family worship needs to be warm. You sometimes think the Puritans preach a long sermon, pray for 15, 30 minutes at a time. Not at all. They're constantly urging, keep it short, pray briefly, have stories, have warmth, have discussion. So anyway, this is a story about Rick Husband. He was an astronaut that was killed on the Space Shuttle Columbia, along with 7 other astronauts on February 1st, 2003. They were believers. And he tells a story about how he left Earth, basically. He made a video for his son and his daughter. And in this video, he said, now at this time, his son is 7 years old. And I'm just thinking now, that was 2003, so that's 22 years ago. So son's 29 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to me as I explain this. He says to his son, basically, Matthew, for every day that I'm away in orbit off Earth, I'm going to have a Bible study with you. I've already recorded it, and I'm going to go through a passage of Scripture, and we're just going to do this together because I love you. And we're going to go through a passage, and I'm going to talk about it with you, and we're just going to go point by point, and then the next day, you're going to watch the pre-recorded video of me. And then Whitney pulls out the point and he says, how precious do you think those 18 devotions on video are to that family today? Wow. I mean, powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's Matthew's 29 years old, and he's probably watched those hundreds of times.
Mm-hmm.
And his point was, if he just had 18 moments sitting down with his 2 children, not even present, so to speak, and they were powerful, how much more of 17, 18 years sitting down with your family every single day, sometimes even morning and evening, and thousands of hours that you're going to invest with your children. This is a little book that doesn't necessarily give the practical, it's not a manual that you're going to follow. You're not going to sit with it in family worship, but it's going to give the philosophy of family worship. Pray, read, sing, church history, and some reasons and excuses that people give for not having family worship.
That's helpful. That anecdote makes me think of Proverbs and saying, a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. I can imagine even his grandchildren watching those videos. And how much more is you're saying, you pour spirituality and God-mindedness and holy living into your children for 18 years. And that's another generation that's being impacted, like we were speaking about last week.
All right, next, Family Worship by Joel Beeke. And this is again by Reformation Heritage. As you can see, about the same size as the other family worship book. And most family worship books are called Family Worship. And they're about 50 pages. This is just Beeke's side. Again, very warm. He actually gives some book recommendations as well. I'm always surprised at how many people have written on this. He mentions J.W. Alexander, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Matthew Henry, the great commentary. He talks about family worship. George Whitefield, Douglas Kelly. There's even a book by Terry Johnson that I used to have, but I gave it away as a gift, called The Family Worship Book. And it kind of is a resource book for family devotions. That might be a good book for others to purchase. It's by, I think it's published by Christian Focus back in 1998. So this is a nice little 50-page book on family worship by Joel Beeke.
Great. What's the next one?
Then, probably the gold standard. I'm going to say, if I could choose one book that's the most thorough on family worship, the philosophy behind it, the excuses, the biblical reasons that we ought to give, is Thoughts on Family Worship by J.W. Alexander. He lived in the 19th century, And his father was Archibald Alexander. I read his biography, one of the best books on preaching I've ever read. I think it's something like on Princeton and preaching. That was his father. Then his son, who also wrote his father's biography, J.W. Alexander, pens this tremendous book on family worship. This might have been one of the first that I ever read. It's excellent. It's starred up from beginning to end. Now, this one's a little bit longer, even though it's smallish as far as the size. It's 260 pages, published by Soli Deo Gloria. Let me just read a few lines. Page 195. Speaking of children and servants, he says, tediousness will weary them. Fine language will shoot above them. Formality of connection or composition in prayer, they will not comprehend. Gloominess or austerity of devotion will make them think it a hard service. Let them be met with smiles. Let them be met as friends. So his point is, keep it short, keep it warm. Dare I even say, keep it fun? Now, I'm careful about using that word because everything in our era is fun, fun, fun. But the point is, they should look forward to this. He goes on and says, let them be met as for the most delightful service in which they can be engaged. Let them find it short, savory, simple, plain, tender, heavenly. I find it easy to keep the attention of a congregation compared with that of my family. So his point is, it actually helps me as a preacher, he says, because I need to find more and more ways to keep them engaged. Let me give an example of how we ran family worship this morning. We started out, I have a little liturgy of 31 prayers. So that's basically a prayer for each day, and it's in categories. So 31 prayers for Thanksgiving, 31 prayers for adoration, 31 prayers for confession. And then I choose the prayer for that particular day. So today's the 31st. So I chose the 31st verse, and I gave it to little Clara. She's my little 6-year-old. And I said, Clara, I want you to read this passage in Revelation. Of course, children love that because they're being chosen and they get to participate. So she read a brief verse in Revelation, and then we taught her, okay, I want you to pray, open us in prayer through that verse. I want you to use some of the vocabulary in that verse as you pray. Great. After that, we did some catechisms, some chants. I'm sorry, not catechism. We often do catechisms, but this time we did a chant, something like, when you're the anvil, bear. When you're the hammer, strike. And little chants, okay, you're getting them involved. You're finding ways to make it warm, happy, enjoyable. Then after that, I have a list of Latin phrases. I give them one Latin word each day. You say, boring. Not at all. It's something different. You know what keeps it not being boring is variety. Children like variety. If it's the same thing over and over again, they get bored with it. So I give them one Latin word. They're already taking Latin for their homeschooling. And remember, I don't only have 2-year-old Katie and 5-year-old Luke. I also have 15-year-old Audrey. And I have my wife as well. So now you have to keep all of them. Like, this is not just a Sunday school class of 4-year-olds. You actually have to teach many age groups. So you have to keep it moving. And so I gave them Coram Deo, a Latin word before the face of God yesterday. And then I just gave them a census, a component of faith. Now you might say, that's thick. Latin in family worship? Take 60 seconds. Give them a Latin word. Keep variety. Now the 15-year-old feels like they're being stretched a little bit. And even the 6-year-old is trying to say a census. I think that's fun.
Great.
And then you sing, and then you pray, and then you go move back to reading scripture, and then you tell a little story, and then you discuss it, and then you ask questions. I think that's the idea that J.W. Alexander is urging us to follow.
Just on the point about variety, I would say it's even helpful for adults. Just the little deviation from the norm can help stimulate some thinking and stimulate some new ideas and some focus and attention. there are times even with my wife where I notice it's been a long day, we're both feeling dreary or something, and we'll read through a passage and it'll have some names in there. And to keep her on her feet, I'll be like, okay, name the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay, now was I listening? And
Yes.
I actually start thinking about those things.
Yes.
Or something specific that's a hidden gem inside. And that helps keep our attention going through family worship.
I teach a lot of young people in our setting, and I found that my teaching has improved because of family worship consistent in our home. Let me just read one more page on page 201. He's talking about what happens to the family that has not been doing family worship. They're discouraged. They don't know where to start. They say, you know what? I can't start this late. It's too late. And he says, no, start immediately. He says, he should call his family together before the sun sets, state his purpose in very fewest terms, and carry it into immediate accomplishment. The burden, that is the guilt, of months or years will have rolled away. That day will be remembered as one of the brightest in his calendar and will probably open a new era of domestic profit and joy. So if you're sitting here today and you say, I feel terrible, I've not been doing family worship in my home, great, start today. Sit down with your family. Don't waste another moment. Sit down with your family, say, here's our purpose. I'm going to get a couple tools, some of the books that they recommended in Missionary Minds. And our purpose is to worship the Lord for, let's just start with 10 or 15 minutes. And we're going to try to do this at least once a day as a family. And all the feelings in the past of, I should have been doing this, he says that'll be rolled away. And this will be you'll look back on this day as one of the happiest moments in your home.
Yes. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. So start as soon as possible.
All right, and then
Big boys.
the big boy right here. I'm going to close with this one. Of course, another one by Joel Beeke. This is a Puritan theology, and subtitle Doctrine for Life by Reformation Heritage Books. This is over 1,000 pages, but before you freak out, this is not all on family worship.
And it's a bigger book than the other ones. It's taller and wider. So 1,000 of those pages.
Yes. So of course, and he's going to deal with, it's basically a systematic theology through the grid of the Puritans. And they have a chapter 53, called The Puritans on Walking Godly in the Home. He begins with an illustration by William Gouge, who has written an excellent book on raising children. And he preached 3 times a week for 45 years. He and his wife, Elizabeth, had 13 children, of which 8 lived to adulthood. He just talked about the benefits of family worship in the home. And he says on page 864, he said, so seriously did the Puritans take the duty of family worship that they regarded the neglect of family devotion and catechism to be covenant breaking with God and betraying the souls of their children to the devil. What do you think about that? Do you think that's an overstatement? Do you think that's too harsh? Do you think the Puritans are right on?
I think they're right on. I think they're right on because the age that we live in, so much effort, and this is even further down the road from them, so much effort is needed to swim upstream.
Lots of practicality. They say, keep prayer short. With few exceptions, don't pray more than 5 minutes. And I would say, when you have little ones, don't pray more than 30 seconds or a minute. They say family worship really is held up as the mark of an ideal father. He said family worship is not a time to preach so much as it is a time to discuss and apply. Let the children ask questions, encourage dialogue back and forth. And I really appreciate how he doesn't come across with like a judgmental tone. You're not doing family worship. It's try your best. Okay, you're struggling? Let me help you with this. Try these resources. He says on page 872, if you worship twice a day, try an hour, 30 minutes. No. He says try 10 minutes in the morning and 25 minutes in the evening and aim for consistency. I like that. I was just listening to, I'll close with this, How to Be a Man by Foster. I was watching the video on Canon yesterday, and he was just talking about one of the manly principles is don't overcommit and do the best that you can with keeping your word. If you're going to commit to something, okay, we're all, as men, things are going to happen and we're not going to come through. But for the most part, try to come through. Don't overcommit. So with that principle in mind of manliness, and I agree with that, don't immediately say, all right, we're going to start having family worship every morning and evening for an hour. You're just going to break your word. So I would recommend try it once a day, either in the morning or in the evening. Don't try twice a day right away. Once a day, and determine if it's best for your family, if it's in the morning or if it's in the evening. I would think a lot of families would be better in the evening because the dad is often gone early in the morning. And then determine the time it's going to be. I know there's ebb and flow of life. I know there's soccer practice and church activities and barbecues and braais and all these. Okay, I understand that. But in the ebb and flow of life, do the best that you can to guard that time and say, by God's grace, we're going to try 15 minutes every evening. And if you keep it warm, you're going to find really fast, 15 minutes is very short.
Mm-hmm.
Even this morning, I mean, we went for, I think, 40 minutes, and we could have just kept on going. And I think that's because we've been doing it for many, many, many years, and our children know how it goes, and it becomes a warm time that the children look forward to. I hope there's many resources. I hope these 5 resources or so that we gave will be wonderful tools to the home as they seek to carry out family worship in their daily lives.
What a treat, Mfundisi. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to rate it and subscribe to keep posted with more upcoming content. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might find it interesting and submit any questions you may want answered in future podcasts. You can email those questions to paulschleiline@gmail.com. You can also visit betweentwocultures.com for other resources like this. I'm your host, Shamikani Katunga, and until next time, that's it from Missionary Minds.